So good evening. My name is Phil Blustein, and it is a pleasure to share with you my concerns with the current definition of mindfulness as we understand it. So if I was to ask most people what mindfulness is, they probably would say something around the place of awareness of the present moment, non-judgmentally. And that is the classic contemporary definition of mindfulness, according to Jon Kabat-Zinn. In 1979, he created what was called MBSR, Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. This was an 8-week secular program to deal with chronic pain. Interesting part of the definition, awareness, which really came out quite strongly amongst you all. But the other interesting component is non-judgmental. So when I think of non-judgmental, what comes to me is I'm not going to judge, or I'm not going to judge critically. Very, very interesting when you look at what he really meant by non-judgmental. So, interview with Mindfulness Magazine in 2011, Jon Kabat-Zinn on being non-judgmental. There was from the very beginning of MBSR an emphasis on non-duality. What in the world is that? And the non-instrumental dimension of practice, and thus on non-doing, non-striving, not knowing, non-attachment to outcomes. My training in Zen consistently emphasized non-dual awareness. Have any of you ever heard anything like that about mindfulness? Unlikely. So he was very, very influenced by his Korean Zen Buddhism. But he was also a very clever individual because he realized he could not bring his Buddhist beliefs overtly to a secular practice. Okay, so that is what the contemporary understanding of mindfulness is. I'm aware, absolutely important. Non-judgmentally? So let's look at historic mindfulness. Where did the term mindfulness come from? Very interesting. In 1881, a British Pali scholar named Rhys Davids interpreted the Pali word sati, S-A-T-I, which was the understanding of, quote, mindfulness historically. Interestingly, mindfulness came from the Gospels. I didn't know this, but Jesus said, go out and be mindful. And that's where Rhys Davids got the term mindfulness from. So, his interpretation at that time was memory, recollect, or remember. But the critical aspect is that that Rhys Davids' interpretation of sati was probably not the true intent of what it meant. The critical aspect was, yes, awareness of the present moment, to keep in mind what was on your mind, to sustain awareness, and not only to recollect, but to recollect, to unify the scattered mind. So the Buddha created 4 ways of establishing mindfulness. It was called the Satipatthana Sutta. So you could be mindful in your body, what was called Vedana, or a feeling tone. Was it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? This does not mean emotion. Mind, which was, what was the mood of the mind? Greed, hatred, or delusion. And the last component was the Dhammas, the teachings of the Buddha. But very importantly, historic sati was not just limited to awareness. It was the capacity to examine and know what you were aware of. So the Buddha described what was called right mindfulness. So that when you start with the 4 foundations of mindfulness, you are also ardent. What does ardent mean? You're invested, you're passionate, you're curious. Clearly comprehending, very, very important. What he meant by that was that you have insight into the true nature of how the self is created and reality through what was called the 3 marks of existence. How does this world exist? Everything is impermanent. Everything will change. Everything will end. If you try and grab onto something that's going to change and end, what's going to happen? You're going to suffer. And this thing called the self really doesn't exist. You make it up. You fabricate it. It's conditions coming together moment to moment. So interestingly, very different understanding than just awareness. After each one of the 4 foundations of mindfulness stanzas, body, Vedana, mind, and Dhammas, there is a refrain. And what did the refrain state? Contemplating experience both internally and externally. Means I know my experience and I know you're having an experience because we're relational organisms. Observing the impermanence. Again, clearly comprehending impermanence of existence. Conscious of what is present to the bare knowledge of what it is. In other words, body is just body. It is not my body, for removing the sense of self. And finally, abiding independent or non-clinging. So very, very critical understandings to what mindfulness is. Impermanence, and importantly, not clinging. No greed, hatred, or delusion. Historic mindfulness was about discernment. It wasn't about non-judgment. Let me read this to you. A fellow named Rupert Gethin, great Buddhist scholar. Sati is explained as calling to mind wholesome and unwholesome qualities, such that the meditator is in a position to know what qualities are the ones he should pursue and which are the ones he should not. Secondly, sati is said to follow the outcome of qualities, and so to know which qualities are beneficial, which are not, with the result that the meditator can remove those which are not helpful and take possession of those which are helpful. Discernment is important. This is not about non-judgment. Historic mindfulness talked about skillful behavior as the endpoint of what this is all about. When you look at the typical definition of mindfulness in contemporary understanding, what are the final words? Be non-judgmental. Historic mindfulness says this is all about skillful behavior. So this is from what was called the Fortress Sutta. With mindfulness as his gatekeeper, the disciple of the Noble One abandons what is unskillful, develops what is skillful, abandons what is blameworthy, develops what is blameless, and looks after himself with purity. That acting skillfully is a critical endpoint to historic mindfulness. Historic mindfulness was about ethical behavior, not non-judgment. Mindfulness existed in the context of what was called the Eightfold Path. And one of the critical components was ethical behavior. How does Jon Kabat-Zinn approach this? He says that skillful behavior is implicit, not explicit. What does that mean? We don't have to talk about it. We don't have to write about it. The behavior of the teachers is what models ethical behavior. And it is the responsibility of the individual to act ethically. I somehow have the feeling that we need some guidelines around that ethical behavior. And finally, historic mindfulness was about what was called unbinding. What is unbinding? Awakening. That the Buddha felt that mindfulness in its ultimate sense was the segue to awakening. So, I don't have a problem with the fact that there are repeated and new definitions of mindfulness. Buddhism is not monolithic. Whenever it met a new society, a new culture, it was adopted or it was adapted, it changed. The Mahayana, the Zen Buddhists, the Tibetan Buddhists, they came 400 to 800 years after the death of the Buddha. That doesn't mean that what they said wasn't important. My problem with contemporary understanding of mindfulness, it is that it is a limited understanding and explanation for what it truly is. The initial intent of MBSR and mindfulness, according to Jon Kabat-Zinn, was to relieve pain. Historic mindfulness is about skillful and ethical behavior and ultimately transcending, moving beyond the conditioned nature of self to enter into a mindful space of innate compassion, wisdom, and interconnectedness. Tremendous difference between these two. So I see mindfulness as a three-step process. Awareness, absolutely important. Critical foundation for mindfulness is awareness of the present moment. But bear in mind, this is not just awareness. What we need is what is called meta-awareness. We need to know what we know. How many of you have eaten a meal and not tasted whatever you ate? How many have driven your car from point A to B, ended up at point B and said, who was driving the car? Second part of the process is relationship. How are we with what we know? And this is the component of receptivity, friendliness with what is known, openness, allowing, acceptance, and embodiment. Mindfulness is just not about the mind. I think it should be called wholefulness because it's mind and body. And the second component of relationship is discernment. This is not about non-judgment. When I get the sense of when I ask, what is non-judgment? If I ask myself, okay, how do you want to be, how can you be non-judgmental in this moment? What comes to me is a sense of restraint, of holding, so that I won't judge. But that totally goes against the first component of receptivity, of friendliness. So discernment, the critical aspect about discernment is having an understanding how we create our reality, how we create our sense of self on a moment-to-moment basis. The understanding that this reified understanding of who we are ourself is a temporary, ephemeral, conditioned construct that arises on a moment-to-moment basis. And it is through the discernment that we are able to not identify with the sense of self, which is the segue for liberation. The third component of the process is skillful action. When I do not have a sense of self that I must defend, that I create a boundary, a barrier between me and you, skillful behavior happens naturally, intrinsically, because I don't have to protect this self from you, that I can open to the interconnectedness and interdependence of all existence. So mindfulness, as I see it, is a three-step process. Meta-awareness, relationship with receptivity, friendliness, and discernment, leading to non-attachment to self and skillful action. So, if I was going to phrase it in terms of the full context, I see mindfulness as meta-awareness, engaged embodiment, insight into self-referential judgment, leading to non-attachment of self and skillful action. That's my understanding of what mindfulness is all about. It is a beautiful, complex, rich, nuanced process. There's something very beautiful about it, and that's what we need to look for.
Thoughts? Questions?
Well, I will go. I appreciate that you came at it from starting with Jon Kabat-Zinn's definition and interpretations of the layered around non-judgmental. So I'll take that as a given. I have more difficulty with some of the contrast between non-judgmental versus heavy non-discerning. Let me start with a simple example, because I took a lot of your talk to be in the abstract. Let me start with an example, and then I'll come back to the question around the example. Simple thing, I'm busy meditating, trying to be mindful, sitting still, noting what's coming into my brain. And at some point I notice something where I go, oh shit, I shouldn't have done it that way, that was all wrong, and oh God, I feel bad, whatever. Right? And then, as part of that, one of my many monkey brain thoughts that goes through my head, and that's just one of them. But at some point, I'm removed enough to go, whoa, wait a minute, there's a judgment there about myself.
Mm-hmm.
I should try to let that go. I recognize there's a judgment, and I have to think about, is that a healthy, useful judgment to me? You alluded to that, of whether something is helpful to ourselves, or something we want to let go. And then I carry on. So in that little example, as I said, my perception, there is a judgment going on. I said to you earlier that I'm constantly judging all the time. It's like I can't stop myself. But there's an ability to recognize the judgment, and then there's what to do about it. So now, with your thought, I took away a bit of a, you don't like the non-judgment, it should be non-discernment, and I feel like maybe that's creating a duality there, that it's this or this. And is there space in there to, yes, I want to reinterpret and clarify what Jon Kabat-Zinn meant or did, and what are the origins and where should we be going? But that actually there isn't necessarily a need to toss out realities around judgment. I don't know if I'm making sense,
Okay.
but
Yep.
I feel like what I heard from you, rightly or wrongly, I can beat myself up here about this, being too judgmental, reading too much into it. But anyway, but I feel like I heard it, no, not that, this instead.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if, again, you talked about it's not yes or no, or positive, negative, there's the neutral, and there's a whole spectrum of multiple things of what stuff can be.
Sure.
So, any comments? Or from
So the question,
Mary, or
the question is, I'll address it first, and then you're quite welcome to add. The question is some more clarity around non-judgment and discernment. So I am not saying, and maybe perhaps I wasn't as clear about this as I should have been. I'm not saying that being non-judgmental is bad. But what I'm saying, or what I meant to say, or try to explain it, is that Being non-judgmental is a spontaneous arising from the insight of what is going on. Discernment is insight into understanding how something came to be. Judgment is a decision for most of us. What does this mean about me? How am I in relationship to what has happened? Did I do something good or wrong at work? Will I be judged for what I have done? So, to start the conversation, that's the distinction between judgment and discernment. In order to judge, you have to have a reference point to judge it. We use the sense of self as our reference point to judge what is going on. And it's always judged against this belief system of who I am. Being non-judgmental, I think, is not an intentional process. It is a spontaneous process. What do I mean by that? If I can develop the insight into understanding how the sense of self is made, and it is not a real entity in the sense that it's an absolute truth. It exists. This is not about a denial of the sense of self, because we all have this thing we carry around that identifies us. But what I'm saying is that as I bring insight to how my sense of self is created for my historic woundings and unmet needs that are being triggered in this moment, then slowly, with that insight, I get slowly disentangled and owning the sense of self, so that I can ultimately simply be present with what is non-judgmentally. But being the non-judgmental is a spontaneous arising from understanding. Why do I need to judge it? I made it up. Who's the sense of self? The biggest problem we have in our relationship with experience is we take it personally. If we didn't take existence and experience personally, we would not suffer. So I see non-judgmental as not something we effort to do. So you get upset. Well, you know what? Just let it go. Those are like clouds in the sky. Those are like cars running in front of me, and I can just let it go. Well, excuse me, but those clouds are tsunamis at times. They are not clouds. And you cannot will behavior by simply stating, let it go. And that's what I looked, how does Jon Kabat-Zinn explain how to be mindful? Just let go of your thoughts. Excuse me, that ain't working for me. I need a strategy. And this wasn't the place to do that. But understanding how the sense of self is a construct allows me to let go of the sense of self. I'm not referencing everything against the sense of self. It isn't a measure of good or bad. I think ultimately the reference point is non-self-referential discernment. What does that mean? It means that every moment is not about, uh-oh, what does this mean about me? Am I good or bad? Am I safe, loved, or worthy? No. Every moment is about, how does this impact us all? Is this from a position of kindness, generosity, wisdom, respect, non-harming?
Could I weigh in?
Yeah, but any reflections on that, or?
No, I followed you there,
Okay,
and that was a helpful clarification, and I just need to digest it.
yeah,
Stew on it.
great question. Thank you for, and now Mary's gonna offer.
Yeah, I just wanted to weigh in on this whole thing with Jon Kabat-Zinn.
Hello, everybody. He does something that I first noticed with Brene Brown, and that is he tends to pitch the message of Buddhism to an American audience and address American anxieties. North Americans are highly self-punitive, judgmental of oneself. We beat ourselves up, we strive and we punish ourselves if we don't meet certain standards. Other cultures, in particular Eastern cultures, they're not like that. So this is not, as Phil has pointed out, this is not that much of an issue, this self-berating all the time, and this constant anxious striving. That's a very North American phenomenon. And it's particularly vicious in our current world. And he has pitched that unconsciously or consciously, that non-judgmental bit. He's trying to relieve Americans of that anxiety about how I'm doing with my meditation. Am I a good meditator or a bad meditator? Oh, I screwed up there, I got all distracted, oh, bad me, bad me. And I think that's what he's aiming at. And that's okay, except that it does narrow the perception of Buddhism to being simply, oh, that's okay, self-soothing, for a culture that is very anxiety prone. And similarly, his focus on his lack of focus that Phil pointed out on ethics, very unpopular notion. Nobody tells me what to do, especially in Alberta. But it's that stance that we have, this defiance towards being told how to behave, because we've been raised in often many of us in a very punitive Judeo-Christian context where there's a lot hanging on your behavior, and there's a revolt against that. So he doesn't want to buy into that judgmental sort of ethical. He's not going to tell you to. He never mentions the 5 precepts, does he? Or if he does, they're kind of under the table. So ethics and sila and virtue and purity, all those things, not popular. So in order to get his message across, I think he had to Americanize it in order to make it in any way palatable, because people will revolt at being told how to behave. And they need to hear that, you can be non-judgmental. So I can see his instincts going in that direction. But in doing that, as Phil has eloquently pointed out, he's narrowed what Buddhism is really about. And it arises from, I sense, a psychologically much healthier culture that has positive self-regard from day one. Children are welcomed. People are good. They don't have this born in sin thing going on. And so there isn't that cultural weight of existential guilt that seems to arise in the West so much. So pure Buddhism, whatever that is something that in its Eastern inflection is much less judgmental to begin with, because you're okay as you are, so.
But it's very interesting, when the Dalai Lama came to North America, he was told, there's all this self-judgment. And the Dalai Lama said, what self-judgment?
Yeah.
I do not believe that does not exist in the Eastern culture. I think it's an element of that it is not recognized. When you're a 4 and 5-year-old and you are being abused, you will have lots of issues about your sense of self-worth and self-identity. It is a universal existential reality. None of us come out of this unscathed. And yes, I totally agree with you that the Eastern culture is more of a collective than a personal initiative, but personal trauma exists universally. You want to say anything?
Is there anyone else, did anyone else
Yeah.
have any further questions for Phil? Thoughts on that? And even what Phil's sharing as it relates to your own practice around even like letting go, which can be deeply challenging for many of us for all the reasons that Phil has shared. So any thoughts on that?
I think there needs to be, just to quickly finish because we know we need to move on.
Yes.
Words alone are not enough. You need insight. You need to have a strategy. How in the world are you going to understand this sense of self? And it took me years, and I still don't totally, authentically feel it all the time at all. But I believe there is a way to do that, to understand. And whether it's through the Buddhist understanding of everything is impermanent, you grab on, you suffer, causes and conditions come together to make the sense of self, or use a Western psychological approach to say, my inner child wounding is being triggered in this moment, and that is how the sense of self occurs. Mindfulness is a wonderful strategy to approach this. It is possible to liberate yourself from your suffering. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time.
Me?
Yes.
So I want to jump in because that was the perfect segue.
Oh,
Thank you. Didn't even know you did
I
it.
planned it.
Yeah. Phil's initial comment in his last commentary was that words are not enough. And my presentation this evening, once I get my glasses on, is I was going to be talking about creating conditions for mindful living. How do we set the stage for a mindfulness practice? And like Phil, I tend to enjoy going after the unfashionable bits of meditation practice because I think that's where the meat is and what will really help us. I want to begin by just delineating two aspects of meditation so that we're clear how this arises in the tradition. There is, first of all, in our practice, traditionally a concentration practice and an insight practice. Much of what Phil has been talking about has been the insight practice, where we examine what comes up, both inside ourselves and externally, and we look at it not in an introspective way or a navel-gazing way, but rather, what is my relationship to what is coming up? And what decisions do I need to make around that relationship? Is this a wholesome relationship? Or is this a phenomenon that I need to act on to make the world a better place? Or is it a mind state that I need to work on discarding? Or even cultivating, if it's a wholesome mind state? So those are the types of thoughts that go around this notion of insight. So we can navel gaze all we want into why our mothers treated us this way or our fathers or all that. Generally, you may have discovered this, that goes nowhere pretty quickly. Or it's endlessly fascinating, but that's the problem. It's endlessly fascinating and you don't go anywhere else. So to attenuate that wish to explore in a sort of me-centered fashion, but rather look at, okay, well, how am I thinking about this? What is my relationship to this? 2 weeks ago when we were here, somebody mentioned becoming enraged in the car when somebody cuts them off or, does something bad. And, how hard that is to control that or to manage that. And the idea was suggested that we just use this as an opportunity to examine the condition of anger in me. Forget about the circumstances. Anger has arisen. That is the dominant feeling. What is my response to my anger? And once one does that, and as you were saying, sorry, I don't know your name. Marcus. You can look at it from above and say anger is there. It's not my anger. As Phil said, get rid of the self, the owning of it. There is anger. What is it like? And what is my response to it? Is it helpful? Probably not. Where's my blood pressure? Pretty high. Am I going to take it out on other people when I get home because I'm so frustrated? Or am I going to cradle my anger and be friendly to it, let it go, let it soften a little bit, explore it, let it just sit there, let it just hang for a while and it'll take care of itself, which it very frequently does. So that's the practice of Vipassana. And as Phil has pointed out, it's more complex than that, but in a nutshell, that's that exploration of phenomena that arise and how we can go about it to gain insight. That's the practice of insight. Now that's all great, I believe in that. But there's one thing that needs to happen too, and that's that other prong of mindfulness, which is concentration practice. And this is something that is a little less fashionable because it requires something called discipline and regularity and dedication and work. And I find sometimes not here, but in general, it is less emphasized how important it is to just take 5 minutes every day, whether you want to or not, or start small, 1 minute, or half an hour if you have the chutzpah for it, and practice training the mind to focus. Because you can't engage in that insight meditation where you stay with one phenomenon, look at it, examine the relationship to it. You can't stay there unless you have trained the mind to be strong to do that. So I'm going to speak tonight about concentration practice and how that works. It is the other piece of the mindfulness practice. The two go hand in hand. And particularly for beginners, don't underestimate the power of just making the mind strong, developing the muscle that will enable you to stay with unpleasant feelings so that you're not trying to be afraid of them or push them away, or to stay with pleasant feelings and want and start grasping and holding. But you have to be able to stay with those phenomena that arise and examine your relationship to them with focus. So this whole other practice is about developing the focus to do this. And that takes some muscle and some dedication. So it's a bit like an ice skater who does, ice dance, Kurt Browning kind of stuff. Hours and hours and hours of going around in figure eights, doing their figures on one skate, following that line on the ice, getting it exactly right. No frills, not exciting, boring as can be, but you go round and round to train the feet, to train the blades of your skates, to train your legs, to train your back, to stay focused on that line on the ice. That's an analogy to what we're trying to accomplish in the mind, that ability to be very finely focused. Now, one of the things that this does, for those of you who may be skeptical about the practice of meditation overall, if you just do this one practice of focused meditation and nothing more, you will find your life is better because you don't make as many mistakes. You don't forget your keys as often. I do that too. Where the heck did I put them? Glasses, that's the other one. So things go better when we're focused. That's kind of a general rule of life. Most people would agree with that. It practiced in a meditative context, it leads to many more things than that, but at the very least it gives you better control over what you're doing in your life because you're connected with what's going on. I would also say that the type of breath practice that we do, the breath is a neutral object, right? There's nothing much. I mean, you can get excited about the breath if you want to, but after a point, it's just the breath. But that's its virtue, because there's very little emotion attached to it. There's very little thinking. It's not something that's going to make you angry. I'm so mad that I'm breathing in. I'm despairing that I'm breathing out. No, that almost never happens. We never say never in meditation. But so it's a neutral object. So it accustoms us to being connected with something that's not going to throw us off emotionally. It just gives us that clear place to start. And as you develop the muscle to stay with that neutral object, you become more peaceful in yourself. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. So that you can begin to tolerate being steady with things that are less peaceful. This is the analogy I'm going to give you for this. It's not a guided meditation, but it sort of sounds like it. Imagine that your life is a backyard, a big backyard, and you're wandering around in your life. All your toys are there from childhood. The dress that your mother didn't want you to wear it on your first date, but you wore it anyway. And all the things that happen in your life, the sandbox, the swing, everything's there. You're walking through that. And in normal life, we walk through our life, through our backyard, and we're distracted by this memory or that emotion or this unconscious association, and it's all there pulling us in many directions. At the far end of your backyard, there is a tree. Just a tree, not a nice tree particularly, not a beautiful tree, just a tree. We can choose to focus on the tree and walk towards the tree and allow the distractions of our life to we just go around them and not engage with them. And concentration practice, this other prong of meditation, is like that. You're still embedded in your life, you've got all those things around you, but your eye is on something that is separate from that, and that's where you keep the focus. And you learn gradually over time, practice a little bit every day of bringing the mind back to the tree. Forget the stuff that you're dodging and walking around in. I'm just heading for that tree. I'm heading for the breath. Sharon Salzberg talks about finding the breath. She's one of our famous meditation teachers in the US. And, at the end of the breath, when you're just in that pause before the body breathes in again, you might want to just, I just need to find the breath again, finding the breath, finding the tree, finding the thing that's neutral and apart from everything else that's floating around in your backyard. So, focusing on the breath is actually not that easy, as you've probably discovered. So it's not just I look at the tree and focus on my breath and it's all going to be fine. You get distracted very easily. So what does one do? Well, one tries not to go down the rabbit hole of the distraction. And when the distraction arises and you suddenly wake up that, oh, I'm off again, doing my shopping list, rehearsing my talk for tonight, whatever it is, you simply let that go. Instead of choosing to examine it, as you would in a Vipassana practice, you might say, what is my relationship to that? You abandon that line of thought and just go back to that neutral breath. As soon as you come awake, boom, you're back to the breath. So that you just do not permit yourself to go down those other rabbit holes. Now, the judgment thing, this is where we get judgmental about ourselves, in that sort of small j, as opposed to the capital J judgment that Phil has been talking about. But we do beat ourselves up. Oh, geez, I screwed up again. We do this quite frequently. And that is something that needs to be examined. Judgment is present. Back to the breath. That's all you need to do. It's a very simple practice, but it's hard to implement. But after a while, you get the hang of it. And you become comfortable with the fact that I have a judgmental part to my head. It keeps popping up. Okay, well, there it is again, back to the breath. I'm hungry. I want a cup of tea. All those things that keep intruding. Oh, there's that wanting tea. There's desire. That's what that feels like. Okay, back to the breath. Now in Vipassana, you would look at desire carefully. What is my relationship to desire? Is this helpful or unhelpful? Am I dehydrated? Do I need tea? You can explore it from different angles. In the concentration practice, why you abandon that and just stay with the breath. And that's what builds the muscle. So that when you go back into your backyard and you're faced with all these things that are going on in your life, you've got staying power. You can stay with them. Now, one of the conditions that's necessary, both necessary and arises from this kind of practice, is a sense of growing peacefulness. One of the great insights that I had into concentration practice was, what do I need to do to enable myself to focus? And a lot of it is relax the body, soften the body. I'm tense, I'm trying too hard. We're trying so hard to focus on the breath that I'm all over the place. So sometimes I need to simply relax the body. That will help. Sometimes it's just, I need to be a little less judgmental of myself. Sometimes I need to stop for a while and give myself a rest. Come back to it later. Maybe I'm working too hard, putting too much energy into it. Maybe back off a little bit. But what conditions do I need to create around me so that I can concentrate? And the condition is inevitably more peacefulness. So as we become more concentrated, we paradoxically become more peaceful. And in fact, the Pali word for concentration is samadhi. And Joseph Goldstein, another of our famous teachers, defines or translates samadhi as contentment. Because when we're content, we're not really wanting anything to be different. We're not trying to push anything away. We're not trying to grasp at anything. We're content with, I'm being on the breath. I'm just here with the breath. I'm looking at that tree. I'm just going towards the tree. I don't need anything else. So the samadhi exercise or the concentration exercise is more than just building the muscles. It does that all along, but as you pursue it, it becomes a practice of peacefulness. It also becomes a practice of resilience and equanimity, because the more you can stay with one thing, as I mentioned before, you become a little more tolerant of discomfort or a little more tolerant of desire. And you're able to sit with those more unpleasant, demanding conditions more easily, because there is contentment. And all it is a little bit of desire, a little bit of aversion. I have some pain in my knee. There is pain in my knee. Can I sit with that? Yeah. So the concentration practice begins with sheer muscle building, weightlifting, but it very quickly, if practiced on a regular basis, and that's the key, it becomes much, much more than that. And then it kind of coalesces with the Vipassana practice. The two come together. So that you can use that concentration power to practice Vipassana in the way that it is intended to be practiced in the tradition. Oh, I have one. I've got my notes. One last thing. There is one final advantage to this, and it's sometimes things overwhelm us, don't they? There are days when everything goes sideways. I can imagine in the work you do, it's a bit of a gong show sometimes in the courtroom. And those of us in healthcare or counseling, sometimes we know that it can be quite overwhelming. Our political situations right now are overwhelming for many, financial problems that people are facing, and etc. The concentration practice gives you a refuge. It gives you a place to go when you're overwhelmed. Forget about trying to figure it out. Forget about how am I relating to all these things. Let's just go back to the breath. Drop into the breath. You're standing in line at the grocery store. You're thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be so expensive. And the lady ahead of me has all those coupons. And the girlie at the cashier is new. She's got training on her name tag. You think, oh, can we just drop into the breath? And just go back to that place that you've come to know by practice, that, oh, I can just hang out here for a while, where it's neutral, and let the body de-escalate, let the emotions de-escalate. And boom, before you know it, you're in your car with your groceries. So it does become a place of refuge, and you'll be surprised how handy it is if you've developed the strength through regular practice. It is a really solid refuge, and that's why in the Buddhist tradition we talk about taking refuge in the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma. You've got a place of safety. That's it for me.
Thank you. One of the things that arrived for me was when you were talking about the energy or the contentment that's arising. Do you see that as almost like a level of acceptance as well? Like, where does acceptance come into the practice?
Yeah, so acceptance, two things. Acceptance, number one, is just recognizing this exists, like the reality of the phenomenon. That's just accepting as opposed to denying or ignoring. Is, okay, this is what's in front of me. Acceptance, number two, however, is more along the lines of what Phil was talking about. How do I evaluate this? How, not in terms of, I'm trying not to say don't judgment, but what are the implications of this? Is this a phenomenon that I want to accept into my life as something that will guide me or not? So yeah, you can accept that a phenomenon such as anger exists. Do I want to accept that this is a good way to be? Not necessarily. So anger is present. what do I do about that? I don't think this is valuable. It will make me suffer. It will make other people suffer. So in that sense, I think we don't accept it. But we accept that it's present, if you see the difference. But we can cultivate ways to lessen its hold on us. I like to use more positive examples like compassion. Sometimes we feel compassion arising in ourselves, and we notice that, and we think, hey, compassion is present in me at this moment. I feel caring and concern for this person or this creature. This is something I want to accept and continue and cultivate. This is a part of me that I can express that will reduce suffering in the world and in myself. So we cultivate those things that we find are helpful or skillful, and we dismiss and try to lessen the impact, let them go, the things that are not going to be helpful to ourselves or others. That's ethics, isn't it? Because then you behave in a particular, you train the mind to respond more and more in that positive way.
This is so much fun.
Are you having fun?
Great talk, Mary. But now I want to ask you something, because we're having a discussion here.
You have to go. Oh, it's going to be your turn.
Well, here
Well,
I am always here, and I will be here again, not to worry.
I want to ask you about the tree.
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're saying, the tree in its concentration practice, it's the breath.
Oh, yeah.
So what is mindfulness? Mindfulness is awareness of the present moment. Meditation comes from this Pali word bhavana, cultivate. Cultivate what? Awareness. Awareness of what? The present moment. So if I'm angry, why isn't the anger the tree? In other words, you're bringing you're suggesting, and this is why we want to talk about this, you're suggesting go to the breath, which is a great way to stabilize it. But if mindfulness is about awareness of the present moment, and I talked about receptivity, being in relationship with friendliness, isn't the tree whatever is in front of you? I'm angry because I did something at work, I forgot my keys, and I'm angry at myself because I can't find my keys. Isn't part of mindfulness then directing our attention to the anger, not trying to figure it out, but being the
present.
anger and feeling it and experiencing it? Because in order to get to that higher level of insight into what the self is, that's going to take forever. But feeling the anger and trying to be with it and experience it in a physical sense, that's doable. So where's the tree?
So the tree is, see, anger is, what you're talking about to me, Phil, is that's vipassana, that's insight, where I have a phenomenon that is disturbing, and I need to accept it. It's in front of me, it's present, and I need to examine my relationship with it. I need to stay with it until it transforms, or I make some decision about how I'm going to either cultivate it or lessen its impact. So there's a lot of mental activity around that that requires a concentration power. You have to be able to stay with that anger. You have to focus the mind on, okay, how am I relating to this? That all takes mental, neurological, neurophysiological energy to do that. So what I'm talking about, the tree, is a practice object to me. It's how you develop that ability to stay focused. It's not going to give you insight. It's the practice of strengthening the mind to stay with, in the case of the tree, something neutral, but that's the beginner piece. And if you can do that, then you move on to more complex.
Yeah. See, I'm saying, I don't see this as a cognitive process. Vipassana is insight in terms of understanding why I am upset, but simply resting in the anger, in the physicality of the anger, is not a cognitive process. It is simply being with what is as it is, without any need or desire to change it. but
Oh.
accept being with it.
Yeah.
So that's how I see it, as a relational process without cognition.
You also talk about meta-cognition, though, or what was the word?
Meta-awareness.
Meta-awareness. And I think that that's what I'm talking about in terms of Vipassana, is you're actually working with a phenomenon to allow it to transform or to affect your behavior in some way. So there is an active meta process going on that probably isn't there with a concentration exercise, because all you're doing there is training the mind to stay focused on one thing, so that when anger arises, you have the power to practice a meta awareness productively.
To stay with the anger.
Yeah, to stay with it. Marcus.
Thank you, Mary. What you described seems so simple.
Oh, it's a piece of cake. Piece of cake.
And I feel like, why the hell hadn't I thought of it? There's a contrast between the concentration type of exercise or meditation and the insightful purpose type of exercise. Are you, and it relates a bit to what Phil's raising that I had already in my head too. Are you suggesting, would you suggest that it can be, if not always, useful to come out of meditation with a clear purpose of which of the two am I doing? And you did say very clearly that there's a training component to the concentration part, so that it's worth spending 1 minute, 5 minutes, whatever, on a daily practice to build that muscle. I totally get it. And what strikes me is a difference possibly between I get up in the morning, first thing I'm going to do my concentration meditation as part of my exercise, my daily exercise. I'm going to focus on the tree, my breath. And as needed, maybe not with the strict discipline of a training exercise, but periodically as needed, I would go, I'm feeling anger.
Yeah.
I need to go sit with that.
Yeah.
I'm going to go have an insightful
There you go.
meditation.
Yeah.
And I could even do the two in one day.
Yeah.
But having clarity of where I'm going with the two. Are you suggesting
Yeah,
that's important?
most definitely I am. Because in the tradition, you reach a point in the instructions for advanced meditation for monks and nuns, you reach a point where you can either, you go in a Vipassana direction or you go into the jhanas, which are continually pursuing that concentration to a very high level. And it becomes, for me, it's a little bit esoteric when it gets way up there, but it is a very conscious decision when you reach a certain point of concentrative ability. Okay, am I going to choose to address this phenomenon and use a Vipassana approach to it, an insight approach, to work on my sila or my virtue and my personal transformation? Or am I going to remove my mind into ever more rarefied states of concentration? And both are legitimate paths in the Buddhist tradition. And both are necessary at different times. And it requires a certain agility of mind to decide, okay, now I just need to practice concentration because my mind is all over the place today. I need to just work with the breath. Other days, you're electrified because a lot of difficult stuff has come up at work, say, oh, okay, I need to sit and just process, as Phil says, I need to just be with the anger that is present and work with that and allow it its expression so that it can, feelings recognized are healed. That's part of the healing process, is to recognize and honor and give space to emotions that come up. So that's that process. And you make the decision, yeah, I need to work on that anger. So it's not one or the other, it's an intelligent decision that you must make. What is necessary in this moment?
And that, I'm sorry, I was just gonna say, and that is the two wings of mindfulness, right? Like awareness and compassion. To know what we need through the energy of compassion to say, okay, this is here. What is it, to your point, that I need to set my intention to, and to bring the compassion to give it to ourselves.
Yeah.
Right? That it doesn't always have to be
one way. It's
Oh, gosh,
like,
no,
you know?
absolutely not.
Yeah.
No,
so
you choose
listen.
what is necessary. You do, in fact, somewhere there is, the Buddha says something in one of the teachings, or whoever put the teachings together, about doing what is necessary and knowing what is necessary in the moment. So this is why I appreciate this approach, because it really does require some intelligence. It respects your power to make decisions for yourself about what you need. No one's telling you how, that you must do this or you have to figure it out yourself. Those were the Buddha's last words. Figure it out for yourselves. Not quite so colloquially as that, but that was basically his message, is you're on your own and find your path. So it's a tremendous gesture of respect for the integrity of the human mind to say, you can do this.
Is there any other questions for Mary?
Oh, falling apart.
That's okay.
World falling apart.
Here's enough PowerPoint.
Okay,
It's okay.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
thanks. I'll just get that out.
Oh, I thought you were gonna say, well, at this point, it's 8:22,
Oh, my gosh.
so that's okay.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, but actually, for my part, it really was an evolution of what you're saying, Mary, in the fact that the practice itself is really what leads to our change, our transformation. You know, and
Yeah,
that is
yeah.
the gift of the practice, and that really was, you know, where I was gonna end tonight, is just that reminder for all of us to say, you know, through the practice, like you literally took the words out of my mouth. I literally have in my second paragraph, the power of the breath, and doing that practice so that when we go to live and to interact and have our relationships, that same attention, that same dedication that we brought to our breath is now here and resonant in an interaction that is maybe
Yeah.
causing me challenge or is difficult, that I can rely on something that I brought to myself. And thus, we have change, we have transformation, we begin to awaken to ourselves, to a different way of being, to finding that space of wise choice, to the words we choose, the actions we make. You know, it's, to me, that is the greatest gift of this practice. And the natural outcome of that is that after, you know, we've had this insight and we've looked and we've brought wise action, we've brought wise speech, then we have to look outside of ourselves. We have to look to community, to our society, and the changes that's needed, that's calling for our attention. And how now do we bring those skills of mindfulness and that desired action, that wisdom, to make change and transformation outside of ourselves? That feels like the greatest calling, you know, family to community to society to our world. So all of that, in 2 minutes, my speech wrapped up. So thank you all for coming. Is there any other thoughts or things that are arising from you from the practice and the discussion tonight? Thoughts?
So the idea of being mindful of presence, or just simply mindful of awareness without any other relationship. I'm feeling angry, but not necessarily bringing that into the experiential, like a relational context of I'm feeling angry.
Yeah,
It's simply being mindful of awareness,
yeah.
or mindful of presence prior to assigning any kind of story of, you know, what is being perceived.
Yeah.
I just want to get your thoughts on.
Well, that's your turf. I think, yeah.
Go ahead. You can address it.
I'm not sure what your question, I get what you're saying, but I didn't hear the question.
Yeah, that's a good point. It was really more just to discuss. It's just kind of like,
Yeah,
because what I heard, what I took away was kind of someone who's mindful of something
yeah.
and trying to address the fact that it's a false self. It's,
Oh, right,
it's a
yeah.
story and it's really not true. So let it go, let it go, let it go. But even before that, if you're simply being aware of being aware, or being mindful of being aware, or being mindful of being present, and then just kind of stop it.
Stuff it there.
And that's the mindfulness
Yeah.
practice right there.
Yeah. And it's amazing what you can achieve even to that point. Yeah, that just the awareness of a sensation in the body or an emotion that's present. Just knowing it's there is a huge first step. And I think if more people just even did that, the world would be a better place. Without owning it, as Phil was saying, you know, we create a self out of our emotions. I'm so angry. That's my anger, or my pain, or my sorrow. You can carry on from here.
You know, I think you're talking about very sophisticated practice of awareness.
Yeah.
There are many things you can be aware of in terms of, am I aware of the sense object? Am I aware of the sense of self? I'm aware of the sense of the process of how it was created. But absolutely, this has become a very big thing in contemporary Buddhism now, awareness of awareness.
Yeah.
I just wanted to leave you with my sense of what hopefully you could bring away from this. This has been a great, I really have enjoyed this. Yeah. Christine was the one who created the concept. And it's so great to hear how other experienced practitioners practice. So I want to thank you. I really learned, and it was fun. Thank you very much. If I can just, my summary for the evening, because I think we should all quickly summarize. My summary is, Mary's absolutely right. The way we're going to meditate historically is a focused breath awareness practice, concentration. And the beauty of that is the impact does not just rest when you're sitting on the cushion.
Right.
That when you leave your concentration practice, it carries on outside the practice. It causes functional and structural changes in your brain.
Yeah.
You don't go to the default mode network if you're not focused. You don't self. And you may live forever as it decreases the telomere length, not shortening. But the bottom line is, when you're out there, you're not going to, personally, I think the concentration practice supports what you do in off the cushion.
Yeah.
And the sense is, I believe that when you get angry, you turn towards the anger, not to figure it out, but to experientially be with it. Where do you experientially experience anger? In your body. And so you concentrate your meditation practice so that it impacts you when you get off the cushion. When you're out in the real world and you're angry, you turn towards the anger.
Yeah.
And you simply feel it. It's not about trying to figure out what it is, but you're in a relationship with it. They say mindfulness is not freedom from pain and suffering. It's the freedom to be with pain and suffering. So that's the critical part. You turn towards it, you feel it, you try and stay with it. That can be very difficult sometimes, because what's calling to be heard is your wounding trapped in your body. Along with that practice of being with what is, can you also develop, maybe not at that time, maybe as a standalone practice, insight into how you create your reality. So I think that for me, that's how I see concentration and vipassana. And Mary is absolutely right. The capacity to have a stable mind is so supportive of insight. Mary?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to Phil's comments is that sometimes even anger can be just so overblown and overdone that you get lost in it, and it really is hard to be with it. Mm-hmm. And so that's when, as Joseph Goldstein says, you can just go back to the breath, go back to the body, the feel of the body, and that works. I can attest to that when things are really tough, it's so simple. And he has said, you know, I'm just so grateful that it is available to in times of great turmoil, where you really just, it's bigger than you are. Sometimes it really is. I can just go back to the breath, and just, it takes a little push, because it's hammering away at you. It wants your attention, but you're too frazzled to deal with it correctly. So just take some time to return to the breath. And if we've got that already set up through our practice, you can do this. And it just settles everything down. Last words from our Christine.
Last words.
Yeah.
And truly the ease and the peace that you describe as a result of that is what holds it all. Like that is the awareness,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
It's awareness of what holds it all. And so the deeper I went into my practice over time, like through the body, I had written here, you know, where I found tension, I also found ease.
Yeah.
And where I noticed worry, I also noticed peace. And where I felt impatience, I felt tolerance. And where I felt anger, I felt compassion. And where I noticed frustration, I also found love. And so we truly have the capacity, and it's all within. So it's that awareness to open and see. So thank you for being here tonight. Appreciate you all.